Okay, welcome all to our next lecture in a series of CrossFit lectures. This is the 18th. All the other 17 you can see on our YouTube channel and look back at them. We assembled them over the years of some interesting thoughts and ideas that we wanted to share from CrossFit, with the idea to give inspiration, but also to get reactions, and to part of it is the work we do, we want to show, part of it we want to have discussions and debates, and this time it's really would be great to have and organize a debate and really we present, or we don't, Oleksandr Anisimov is going to present, and it would be great to get some input, some ideas, and some talks around it. So we see it as a presentation with a discussion, which I hope you will enjoy. I will keep it extremely short. I will introduce Yevgen Kabasin, who is the other moderator. We do it together tonight. Yevgen is in the Ukrainian channel.
Доброго дня.
And that is something important already to mention, that there are two channels. There's languages that you can choose from. You can also see a bit later a description of that in the chat. Choose the language in which you want to follow this. Everything is simultaneously translated. So you can choose Ukrainian or you can choose the English version. The presentation by Oleksandr Anisimov will be in English. That will be followed by a kind of short reaction by Edwin Buitelaar, who will put the presentation in a context of the European law and regulations. The presentation is about law. It is called Rebuilding a Place to Call Home. It is a presentation of a report which I think is enormously important. It's about the preconditions before we even start thinking about rebuilding. How do you rebuild? What should you rebuild? Where should we rebuild? And for whom? So thinking about all these things before you actually start putting stones to each other, start pouring the cement is extremely important. And therefore I'm a highly fan of the work of the new housing policy, who have been doing these kind of reports and these kind of researches from the very start of when the war started, but already before that. So it's a fantastic job that they are doing. In this case, they work together with the Kharkiv School of Architecture, which I also definitely want to thank and mention for their work. So to keep it indeed short, I will give now the floor to Yevgen, please. Yevgen?
Доброго дня.
Good day. Yevgen Kabasin. Welcome to our event. Please remember to choose the channel you would like to listen our event to. We have English and Ukrainian simultaneous translation today. So I would like to invite Mr. Anisimov to make his presentation on the topic of rebuilding a place to call home. We are going to discuss land policy in Ukraine and the issues connected to reconstruction. So, Oleksandr, you have the floor.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the Rosquit team for organizing this event, and thank for the all of attendees who come up to listen to this presentation. Indeed, this presentation was already conducted in Ukrainian a week ago in Lviv. So this is a follow-up for that presentation for an basically international audience, first and foremost, but who missed the previous one will also hear some interesting stories from the past presentation. Basically, we've already had this agenda. This is an opportunity for you to scan a QR code if you have a phone nearby, or follow up the link. The report itself is in English and Ukrainian. This is a QR to an English version. you can also find an Ukrainian version at our website. Basically, we start from the kind of an interesting position because disregarding current war, we have had an ongoing conversion of the national level of Ukraine's land resources from ecological functions, which I think we can understand has begun maybe in the early 19th century, to basically all of those less resilient land uses. And this poses a grave concern for all of the policy sectors we are working with, and basically for the country's future and for sustainable recovery of the country. And this is the introductory component, because it is indeed, we're not starting from a naturally beautiful and sustainable environment which has been devastated by the war. No, we are starting from a position where we already mismanaged the resources in the country. One of the interesting maps I've came about recently, unfortunately after we finished the report, is the map of croplands in Ukraine. I think this is a great work by a lot of people from the USAID, from the World Bank, from the ministry, from National University. So a lot of people worked to make this map real. And I think it shows us a lot of things. So first and foremost, we clearly see the demarcation line where the hostilities are taking place, all of these areas where nothing grows because there is a war raging. But also, if we disregard for a second this dimension of ongoing Russian aggression, we also can see that the scale of agricultural expansion on Ukraine's land is just immense. So it's up to 62% of Ukrainian land, which is cropland. So it's not pastures, it's not places where trees grow. It's basically raw land, raw soil under the sun, which is nothing that we can call a sustainable land use or land development on that scale. And it is covering the whole part of Ukraine. So there is not a single region which doesn't have extensive cropland, maybe except for the Zakarpattia region, which has approximately 25% of croplands. So we are starting indeed from this kind of super export-oriented cropland dimension, which also encompasses things that are now occurring at the local level. So some data just to prove my words, we had 9% of all lands in the country are naturally protected. We can compare that to the aims of European Union to get 30%, and for such countries as, for instance, Estonia or Germany having 20 to 40% of naturally protected areas already. Basically, the war itself has added, with the war damage to the soils and poisoned rivers and debris, now covering 25 to 30% of Ukraine's land area, depending on the calculations. This is not by itself a problem for where we live or how we live or how we use resources. The issue obviously is that we have to move on from whatever conditions we have. And the question is now is that we have around 500 households who live in the inadequate accommodation and who basically need new housing and need to be rehoused somewhere. Moreover, this issue of war damage has posed the conflicting claims for land use, essentially for agricultural activities, which were pushed out from the war-torn regions towards the west and north, and basically adding up to the pressure for the land resources. So my take, I would say, about the generational challenge in Ukraine regarding post-war recovery and also conservation or recovery during the war would be to respond to these multifaceted demands. These multifaceted demands are quite specific, but they are huge. We have energy production, agriculture, housing development, infrastructure provision, climate mitigation, biodiversity preservation, and obviously leisure, all competing for the same land resources in the context of war and post-war restructuring. So the challenge would be to understand and find ways how to respond to these multifaceted demands. Why is that? There is a great book I recommend you all to take a look at. It's called Legacy: How to Build a Sustainable Economy by British economist Dieter Hall. And one of the interesting contributions he makes is his argument that not just the usual, economic ways of dealing with the land resources or any other natural capital resources are detrimental or unsustainable, but that any unsustainable economy will at some moment broke. And when it breaks, we don't know what happens. But clearly, we cannot expect that such a rate of land use that we had in Ukraine previously would be sustained by any other means. Again, putting to the point that whether we had the war or not, our land use policies and land use patterns were not up to the standards or not up to the ways to sustain our livelihoods beyond the next generation. There is some kind of, I don't know whether it's hope or some ideas that are on the horizon. European Union has started to tackle the issue of soil and land health by some quite contradictory policies to some people and some stakeholders. In our regard, there are two interesting discussions. One is focused on achieving zero net land take by 2050, which has become a hot topic in the spatial planning debate in the recent year. And also it is pushing every member state to develop a land take monitoring system to evaluate and understand the land take patterns and effectively to curtail the future land take. Even though these policies are quite complex, they're also part of the broader complex picture of the Green Deal, European Green Deal, which tries to bring a lot of different sectors towards a sustainable economy. In our case, land discussion or housing and land discussion is somehow completely missing from the integration program. And if you open up Ukraine plan, you won't find a single word related to specific land policy issues or ecological recovery and sustainable land use. Having this question in mind, our report in sum provides three components of a holistic approach to land, which in our opinion are a starting point for the future holistic discussion about the land, which is based on comprehensive assessment of the land as a universal but highly limited resource. What is meant by this is that whenever land changes hands, whenever it changes uses, whenever it changes shape, it never disappears. And we have to clearly understand the land is a very, very limited resource, and it's never free, it's never leaking, it's never getting out of any registers. It is always there unless it's actually taken by some function which cannot be converted back. The other component is territorial and governance-centered planning. And the issue here is that trying to mitigate land problems on the local level is often hindered by the problems arising with the capacity of local governments, with the ability of local governments to negotiate shared interests, which all lead to the need of multi-level approach where local, regional, and national stakeholders take part in these collective decisions and also involve NGOs, involve experts, involve academia to coordinate and implement nature-oriented land use policies. All this is underpinned by comprehensive and correlative understanding of current and future needs for land, because unless we understand the compounded needs that are going to be present for the land as a surface and as a soil, which I think is also important because land always functions in both ways, as a surface, as a soil, and as space. All of these sectors that I mentioned about energy production, agriculture, and so on, they all pose different needs and different claims towards land. And our understanding has to be really profound, and we have to be able to put these numbers into the future perspective and understand how the systems of land use will look like in 2030, 2040, and 2050 to plan for that in 2024. On the practical side, we have some components which are nothing to be impossible to implement. They obviously relate to governance and ability of the state to set up several dimensions of regulation and monitoring, such as alignment of national goals in agriculture, spatial planning, and construction, which are at the moment contradicting. Whilst we are trying to preserve nature, we're also expanding agriculture, enabling spatial planning to expand the construction areas and so on. Basically, we are lacking national level land cover monitoring, and we don't understand whether we take more land than is sustainable or not, which land is taken and for what reason. We're also lacking capacity of the Ministry of Environment as a key stakeholder who could be integrating those needs and showing the pathway towards sustainable land use. And currently, most of the state funding mechanisms, not only in Ukraine, but Ukraine specifically, are misaligned with the nature-based principles and do not contribute to sustainable land use. Report itself basically consists of 3 chapters covering topics of housing, land provision, and new geography. And I will briefly introduce the topics or the points we've been discussing within the report, which relate and kind of helped you to understand the outcoming, paradigm of land use and why do we push for these nodes. So the first chapter, we mostly focus on the chapter 1 and subchapter 1.1, which is estimation of needs in housing. As I already mentioned, housing will be pushing for new land use. And whether that land use would be sustainable, whether it would be more land take in the form of sprawl and unsustainable growth, or whether that could be a growth that can be handled within the existing boundaries of cities and towns across the country. And our colleagues, Julie Lawson, Warren Stroy, and Ryan Van Nuveland have researched, have analyzed the data given by, provided by the IOM, and identified that around 500 households currently in Ukraine as of October 23 are in need of housing. That would amount basically for 500,000 apartments that are needed to be built. These claims can be met, or the challenges can be met by a 10-year program of affordable rental housing, which we discuss elsewhere, and you can also read this report and another work we did. But basically, what we need to understand that these needs are geographically dispersed. And a lot of these needs exist in the regions which already experienced growth, some of the regions which were in decline, but in every region there is a need to build new housing, and that need is diverse, and that need is unsustained currently by existing income of the people. We invited Galina Sikhamut to reply or to kind of comment on this subchapter, and she noted a few interesting components. For instance, that we do not actually know what about families from temporarily occupied territories and those who stay abroad, whether they have a decent home or whether they would need additional places to stay. That could be an additional number of people or additional number of apartments to be built. Another thing is that we have complexity to understand whether the respondents are actually planning to return. So that data could shift towards Western regions much more, because people might be answering about their plans to return in different ways depending on their conditions. However, interestingly, even though the paid rental housing is an option, it might be difficult to implement in Ukraine, as the same IM reports indicate that a lot of displaced people and households have an income which is below what they presume to be a poverty baseline, which is 5,864 hryvnias, which necessitates to integrate subject support into social policy of the state. Moving on, for the legal framework, I wouldn't spend much time on this. There is a great report we did in February for our colleagues, Wolfgang Amann and his employer, Austrian Ministry of Climate Action, for this project under the European Bauhaus project for Ukraine, which I think you would find interesting to read. It's also available on our website. So it's also in Ukrainian and in English, but this is our discussion about how to regulate to come by with the needs that were expressed and found out by the reports, such as the one as Ahat, how to set up the legal system for that. Another small component that we looked at was the current efforts for affordable housing provision, because everything has to start somewhere. Interestingly enough, disregarding the kind of project we're looking at, they follow two main path lines. Either this is a completely new greenfield development, or this is a refurbishment and repurposing of existing municipal infrastructures. So it is not none of those projects is actually taking on the possibility of district redevelopment or densification. So they are either indeed greenfield development happening on the outskirts of cities, or they are refurbishing outdated, outmoded dormitories or healthcare buildings to house IDPs. Together, these two projects would amount up to 4,000 something apartments, catering for up to 5,000, 6,000 IDPs, which is a small number, but which is great because it is expected that these buildings would remain in municipal property and potentially be a setup for future social housing or municipal housing policies. Chapter 2 takes on providing land for sustainable recovery of housing, which is our main focus of this report. And to zoom in on the land loss and land use on the national level, we asked our colleagues at the symposium to present some of the data they gathered and some of the knowledge they collected about the land loss in Ukraine. Interestingly enough, we don't have national evidence on the land loss the way we would want it to be there, but there is obviously a lot of land lost due to war. As the war rages on, there is another land loss component, which is a violation of nature protection and land legislation by farmers. So what we've been witnessing is that the pressure for expanding agricultural activities in the western and northern regions is indeed pushing towards violations of river protection and wood protection zones, which are being either put to use for agriculture, or in other ways damaged or destroyed completely, which has to be reversed. Here, the first time we see comprehensive plans. For those who don't know what that is a new new core component for urban and spatial development of every Ukrainian community, which is comprehensive plan of the development of the territory of a community. So 1,460 communities should have those comprehensive plans. And our experts focus on that there is a need to ensure that preservation of biodiversity and adaptation to climate change are indeed included in the development of those comprehensive plans, which is not yet the case. Oleksandr Holubtsov, but presented by Vita Schneider because he couldn't join us, argued for several things. Giving his comments, he highlighted the conflicts that become especially acute in the development and the transformation of lands which have a pronounced natural character, which I think is the case in Ukraine, because most of the free or available land for development is the one that has a natural character, because other lands have already been developed in most cases. It is interesting, we haven't had a strong discussion, but he argues it would be really expedient to talk to officials to acknowledge the greater efficiency of internal development of cities. However, as we will briefly discuss later, this is not an easy task. He also argues for building connections with substantiation of high nature conservation and ecological importance of greenfields, because these are always treated as free lands or lands with no or almost no value. Clearly, they have different ecological importance and biodiversity components. Again, talking about spatial planning for measures to overcome and minimize consequences of war, we have not yet developed any methodologies of how do we take into account of these long-term consequences, and how do we preserve places that have been heavily polluted or how do we put areas that have been medium or got medium or low pollution back into use. Moving on, we had discussion in the report about the local land use policies, which I would illustrate with one of the interesting maps or kind of drawings I had drafted last week for another presentation, which I found interesting to discuss also here. Because what we had in 2020 was the enlargement of municipalities and simultaneously approval of the municipal monopoly over spatial and land use plan. However, this amalgamation of communities, in this case, you could see Vinnytsia city community in the yellowish center, has been amalgamated with territories that had zero connection functionally to the city. So the urbanization currents or kind of directions are completely different, but those directions were already covered by more capable communities. Then they didn't need to cooperate with Vinnytsia. So Vinnytsia expanded in the direction of greenfields, mostly used for agriculture. And now we are looking at new developments of the spatial planning in the form of comprehensive plan, which are yet lacking active or facilitative land policy instruments within them or accompanying them at the local level. And the municipalities are struggling to find solutions for the land shortage within the municipal borders, which has been, in one hand, compensated with this enlargement. However, this enlargement didn't bring any infrastructure. So these greenfield development lands are basically fields, and fields do not provide a lot of space for development if there is no infrastructure. And the last part of the discussion in the second chapter was about district innovation approach. Put simply, it is an approach or area-based strategy about how do we work with the existing built fabric. Clearly, it has often one of the three main agendas. It is either an energy upgrade, so providing that people live in energy efficient or near zero energy built housing. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly. Then there is a question of densification, especially for the bigger cities. They're searching for the areas that could be densified, but also preservation of the communities and existing links, existing social connections within the districts rather than complete redevelopment. Clearly, core issues that correspond to the activities that are being handled within this district renovation is the need for public real estate ownership in a different conditions, but obviously there is a large demand for public takeover of the parts of these real estates that are being redeveloped. There is a need for project capacities on local level, which are often not there. There is a necessity of a just and transparent housing system to provide at the end of the district renovation, to provide for affordable housing, not just for any housing for anyone. And there is clearly a need to access cheap long-term finance and to receive subsidies for the most complex renovation schemes. Ukraine currently doesn't cover any of these four, but I think there is always an opportunity to start with, given the money that is going to flow in, and given the possibility to use EIB's mortgage credits for municipalities to access and to launch some of that construction, even in Ukrainian conditions. Andrei Martin was our expert commenter for this part, and he argued for several things. For instance, that influence of local community urbanization process is currently quite limited and mainly consists of approval of planning documentation. So there is less interest in active land policy and land development. He also concerned that public developers do not exist, and it is the private developers who work with the community or work with the land plots who actually create housing. And it's often the problem that there is no cost recovery for the community, because it's either the developer leaves the place after renting it, so municipality rents it out for quite a cheap standard because there is lack of competition on the market for communal land. And also the communities do not really raise taxes, even if the construction is happening on the private land, because construction taxes are not, because the land taxes are not really effective in Ukraine. Interestingly enough, he noted that there is a significant reserve of land, actually zoned buildable land for development around large cities, and it hasn't been filled. So we don't know the numbers exactly, but this is the challenge, or an interesting question that we need to take care about in the future development around Kyiv, Lviv, Odessa, Dnipro, and so on. Andriy also interestingly connects back to the urban planning and comprehensive city plans, as he believes that there is a potential to cover for the main needs we've discussed earlier in the context of the development of these comprehensive plans. So I would say that experts put a lot of faith in comprehensive plans themselves. However, I do not share this point of view. And the last chapter is called New Geography of Ukraine, Potential for Recovery. And it consists of two short essays, or maybe articles, which we commissioned for Vlad Mikhnenko and Yegor Vlasenko to write. And Vlad Mikhnenko gives us two key points. First one is that the dynamics of post-war reconstruction will not resemble what we want. They will resemble what economy can provide. And that would mainly mean the change of economic centers to the West, where the economy is able to produce materials and components and products that can be sold and used. However, this might not be the places where there is housing yet, or the places where the housing is most needed, potentially driving housing shortage in those areas. Another thing is that their assessment of input-output analysis brings back the discussion of the role of construction industry, and taking on the potential of construction industry to restoring the destroyed, as they call it. So restoring the destroyed buildings and restoring the destroyed infrastructure. That would amount to quite a huge growth if the recovery program streamlines itself, if there is enough finance available, if the programs are working. In 10 years could count for 10% of economic growth from the kind of hole that we fell into 2022. Doubling the volume of national economy, which is nothing of a joke, which would bring us to the level of today's GDP per capita near to Romania. Another component of the kind of a geography of Ukraine is the discussion by Yegor Vlasenko and his connection to the digitalization of Ukrainian recovery, where he puts things under question. He says that most of the planning components of Ukrainian digital recovery are based on the marketplace and project level design. So it's communities that compete for visibility with their projects in this kind of a tabular interface of dream, which is unable to form a coherent territorial vision, because it consists of projects, not of strategies, not of comprehensive discussions on the regional level, linking those projects, linking those investments to deliver actual territorial visions. And there is a case where he shows that the demining of the territories sometimes even also follows this logic, where Tsirkuni in Kharkiv Oblast were demined, but not the whole territory of the community was demined because it wasn't deemed strategic. However, main part of population lived across the mined area, and they had to take a 30 or 40 kilometer detour from that place, which questions the ability, and the need for territorial reading within the recovery, not just for emergency issues such as demining, but also for the future development, where a lot of local issues are not visible from this kind of a project level approach. and need to be embedded in the understanding of the territories, the jurisdiction, biophysical environment, and relational space to be able to put reconstruction policy in a coherent way. I will skip the Konstantin's comments for the sake of time. And I think this would be mainly all for the presentation of the report for now. And I would be glad to hear some feedback and comments from Edwin Buitelar, who supported the first symposium, Rebuilding a Place to Call Home, in Den Haag last year. And I think it would be great to hear him now.
Well, thank you very much, Oleksandr. Thanks for having me. Indeed, I was involved in the event in The Hague. I think it was February last year, I suppose. And it's really great to see how this whole initiative continues and develops even further, and the richness of the problem assessment that you've shown and the different solutions, I think, are really going in a very nice and good direction. I would like to, in a very small amount of time that I have, I would like to pick up on the issue of land policy, which is mainly the chapter 2, I believe, of your report. And while you were presenting, I also made a couple of slides, and I hope that I can share them. I'm sure I can. Does this work? Yes. I suppose you will see it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Maybe you can.
Right.
Yeah, full screen. Perfect.
Yeah. So the issue of public land policy, and I like to pick up on that because that is what I work on a lot. So that's my expertise. And the country that I come from, the Netherlands, has a strong reputation when it comes to public land policy. So maybe there's some sort of both international and conceptual framework that I would like to position land policy in, so that you have a bit more structure as to what it is and what kind of forms there are and how you could think about it. So briefly about that. But before I delve more into the issue of land policy, I want to touch upon an issue that Oleksandr also mentioned. And that is basically a basic infrastructure that you need before you can talk about land policy altogether. If you have a land market, or you want to have a well-functioning land market in which both public and private actors want to invest, you need strong institutions. And what I learned earlier in last year during our conference, but also from your presentation, Oleksandr, is that there is sometimes a lack of clearly defined property rights and not an accurate registry and monitoring system in place. And I think that is a basic condition for a land market to function properly, and before you can even start talking about and thinking about public land policy. So that, I think, is a sort of a basic minimum, a prerequisite before we can move on. And then a bit more about land policy. I always consider, and I think this is also the function it has within many European countries, that land policy as an instrument. It's not a goal in itself, it's an instrument to serve other goals. And one of the goals is are spatial. So, for instance, we want to contain urban sprawl, or we want to contain cities, or we want to stimulate densification within existing cities. That is a spatial goal, you could say. And the other important spatial goal is the provision of public goods, such as infrastructure, parks, green space, water systems, whatever, and merit goods, such as affordable or social housing. And the other main goal of land policy, usually in many countries, is financial in nature. So what many countries try to do through land policy is recover the costs that local public agencies make for providing, let's say, infrastructure, for the plan-making process. All of those public goods and services are usually covered through land policy. And in some countries, local authorities go even a step further. And they say, we do not only want to recover the cost that we make, we also want to capture a part of the value increment, the value increase that is made through the change of the land use. So if you go from agricultural land to housing, for instance, you have a big value increase. And then in many countries, land policies are used to capture those value increases. So that's, I think, an important distinction. So land policy is an instrument to serve two main goals: spatial goals, financial goals. And then, roughly speaking, I think there are two, and you mentioned them as well, Oleksandr, two forms of land policy. That is active land policy. That is a local government buying land, preparing land for development, and then selling the land or giving it out in a land lease to private actors. Those can be institutional actors or individuals. So that is active land policy. A facilitative land policy, in that case, the local government or the national government does not own the land, but uses its planning powers, its public law rules, to sort of force other private actors to comply with spatial or financial goals. So that is what we usually call facilitative or passive land policy. The difference is, in the first case, you are, as a government, you are a market player, and in the second case, you are a market regulator. And these different forms of land policies have their own instruments. So in the case of active land policy, you can either decide to buy the land voluntarily or amicably, or if that doesn't work, you can use compulsory purchase or expropriation to buy the land. And in the case of facilitative land policy, there is the land use plan, obviously, that you can use, the zoning plan, or you can use taxes or impact fees to capture value or costs. What I have learned from Dutch experience, but also from international comparison, are a couple of things. In practice, you see a lot of combinations of these two different types of land policy, so it's not either one or the other in many cases. But you don't use all these instruments all the time and everywhere. So sometimes you have to be very careful, particularly in using active land policy. We have learned a couple of lessons in the Netherlands about the risks of active land policy. And those risks are financial. Lots of local authorities have lost a lot of money by being active in the land market. They've also gained a lot of money, but also lost a lot. So it's a risky business. It can be risky if you want to adhere to the rule of law as a local government. If you are both a market player and a market regulator, there can be sometimes a mixture of rules that is not necessarily in the light of the rule of law. And that can also be a danger to democracy. What we see with the more complex land policy activities is that local councils have great difficulty understanding what's going on and the complexity of the calculation and the accounting that is going on. So that can be a danger for democratic control of government decisions. So those are a couple of warnings that I would like to express when you embark on this journey. And therefore, I believe it is very important to have, at least as a basis, have a strong facilitative land policy where you can control in great depth and detail the activities of private actors, such as, for instance, institutional investors. When they come after the war is over, you have to have strong rules to be able to curb their activities as well. And obviously, you also need this active land policy and those instruments that you can, sometimes as a last resort, you can use to get involved in trying to guide urban development in the direction that you desire. So a bit of a reaction, I suppose, to Oleksandr, but more sort of an attempt to put it in a slightly broader conceptual and international framework. And I would like to end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, both of you. That is a wonderful overview. I think it's great to, we have already some questions, but to give first the floor to Oleksandr, who has a short reaction to a reaction.
Thank you, Edwin. I have maybe two questions to you, intertwined with what you just mentioned. We haven't really discussed it earlier, but thinking about the role of this national level, because, for instance, well, PBL, as we've been there and learned about its functions, is a guiding institution for the national and for the local level about where should the country go, in a sense that where should we at least don't want to go, and how does that feed in within this decentralized decision making, and how does that contract or facilitate proper land use policies on the local level in the case of the Netherlands?
Yeah, well, it's a good question actually. The institute that PBL that I work for, together with my job with the Utrecht University, the origin of that institution is a couple of decades ago, when there was still strong national planning in the Netherlands. So it was a clear connection of trying to gain data about spatial development, about land use, and to use that for policy making at a national level. But then all of a sudden, there was a gradual development towards more decentralization of spatial planning. And then we noticed that the connection between what we did as researchers and what was going on at the local level was not as strong as it used to be before. So, but I think there's a great efficiency to be obtained by collecting data at a national level and making that available for local authorities to work with. If they have to do it all by themselves with the limited human resources that they have, that is definitely a loss of money and of human capacity. So I would say it is a great asset if you are able to have at the national level a strong agency that collects data, that translates that into information that is useful for local policymakers. But this is something else. I think this is really assisting public policy, such an agency such as PBL. What I also refer to is basically a good, I don't know what kind of agency does that in Ukraine, but a good public institution that organizes the assignment and monitoring of property rights, so that also private actors can really play their role within society. Do you see what I mean by that?
Yeah, we have an attempts to set up something similar, but quite distant still, in Ukraine, with the reorganization of the national cadastre and geography institutions. But I think they're not aiming at the qualities and types of work that PPL is conducting at the moment. I think we could, I mean, depending on what's our agenda for the questions and remarks, I think we can move on to looking at the things that are coming up in Q&A.
Yeah, let's do that. Yevgen, can you introduce the Ukrainian question?
Так, доброго дня.
Yes, welcome. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Butlar for your contribution to the development of Ukrainian land policy. The first question is from Lilet Bradels. Presently, it is not very clear. It is about the European support and the rules of social housing provision. Of course, Ukraine would like to join the European Union, and now we are designing laws that are going to govern the housing regulation, actually. And we would like to get a comment about these earlier stages of development, whether the European Union is happy with the SGI program, which promoted housing. It is very important because there are parties lobbying free land for specific types of housing, which is not going to be the best solution to serve the interests of the communities. And I would like to hear your ideas about that.
If this question was aimed at me, then I need some I need some help.
The help is related to translating it better,
Yes,
or
translating it all together, because as you, my channel doesn't work.
Okay, I will just put it shortly that I think this is related to the Julie's question. The discussion is how to set up land use regulations towards giving land or providing land for specific housing construction related to the restrictions that European community and European Union has approached under or has set up under SGA regulations towards the state aid. How do we disentangle the kind of problem between the strategic aims of the state within the reconstruction and potentially also lobbying for private developers to get land, and the other side of the kind of big, I don't know, big discussion where the European Union laws on local laws on state aid apply, and which require the public entities not to fund unnecessary profits for actually public enterprises or public budgets to fund public enterprises and needs that exceed the regulations.
Well, hopefully I understood the question correctly. Well, first of all, providing land for or designating land for, let's say, affordable or social housing isn't something that touches upon state aid rules at all. So for instance, in my country, but in most countries, it is possible to designate land not just for housing, but to say, okay, we want 30% social housing on this spot, and we want maybe 20% middle rental housing there, and then the rest can be market rate housing. That is no problem at all. You can easily do that because you do not support financially any actor whatsoever. Then the other issue is, how do you, if you own land as a local authority and you want to sell it to a private developer, under the state aid rules, you cannot supply that land below the market rate, unless that land is dedicated for social housing, because that type of housing is already below the market rate. So it is simply a different type of housing, and it's allowed to give a discount for that kind of housing because it is not really playing a role in the free market. Hopefully that helps. You are not muted, Lilet, so we hear you all typing.
Oh, sorry.
No worries.
Super irritating always. I would like to go back to the Q&A. We have Ian Morgan. I think this is more a question to you, Oleksandr. Thanking for the overview, thinking about the research that has been done regarding a future municipal-led affordable housing system, which is a bit like the Austrian affordable rent system. is that something that resonates in Ukraine, or is this whole Ukrainian Austrian system? Are people aware of it? Is it being discussed or debated? What is the resonance in Ukraine on these kind of European examples?
Thank you for the question, Jan. I think clearly why I asked Edwin about the role of PPL is because municipalities are often afraid to act, especially on the regard of active land policy, unless there is some permission or a guiding principle or guideline or strategies set up by the state that encourages them to do so. Because indeed, we've seen a lot of lawsuits against municipalities that are being filed through the years because municipalities are not conducting their land policy according to, private owners' ideals. There is also kind of a question of corruption in the municipalities, but it is being put forward as a kind of ultimate problem, which obviously is not, because land mostly is already private, and thus the corruption about public land use is not really a crucial issue in this regard at this moment. Whether municipalities actually take on this issue is at the moment up to them. So it's the problem, for instance, that there is no channel where the land policies and housing policies with the municipalities are discussed on a systemic basis. We could argue that, yeah, for instance, some topics are not picked up because municipalities don't want them, but it is because municipalities don't know them. So there is no effective method of how we promote any certain idea or a policy program within the current system, because it's very much focused now on the local budgets, on the issues of war, and there is little space to squeeze in with the questions of land policies or even housing policies for that regard. There is some cases, and clearly those who come with money, such as IOM, they were able to convince municipalities to work with them on social housing projects, which have this cost trend component, but which do not lead to necessarily a national system in any form. So I imagine this is both for the active land policy and for the active housing policy, which require some kind of discussion, I'd say, first of all, because municipalities need to learn what does that mean in clear words, in an understandable language, and then look forward whether they're able to implement them within their capacities or whether they should restructure their departments. And those needs differ. Clearly, municipalities that are in the front line, they're limited much more than municipalities that are now serving as the backbone of the economy. And municipalities on the front line are concerned with the day-to-day survival, and there should be no question about why are they not paying attention to this, because they have no mental space and they have no capacity to do it. But I think municipalities closer to European borders are indeed able to take on many of these ideas. However, we all know the capacities on the local level and the general lack of motivation to promote these complex policies is there.
Hank, thanks a lot.
Можна продовжити?
Okay, I would like to continue if it is okay.
Yeah.
So I would like to continue answering the question by Mr. Morgan, or rather continue it as a question. Do we have any feedback from Ukrainian state level, from Ukrainian municipalities about the land policy, about changing towards the new kind of policy? Do we have it from different regions? Is it different in different regions? What can you say?
I think the topic actually appeared on the horizon with the question of comprehensive spatial plans. And I think since we started this discussion on active land policy in the, so to say, political circles or circles where decisions are made, since last year PBL forum. I think this topic has had limited outreach and limited persuasive capacity to some people. So on the conceptual level, I think it started to take roots, but I cannot say whether we can prove whether any municipalities or any other state actors are actually looking forward to implement any of these policies. This is not yet the case, unfortunately. One other thing about the land policies, and again related to the need for potential state actor, is that land interests are competing. And what I mentioned in our report, and also proved by some other experts' comments, was that municipalities lack guidance. So broadly speaking, municipalities are given instruments, as Edwin said, but they're not given any understanding, or they're not provided with an understanding where to put those instruments to, which aim should those instruments serve. So these topics of cost recovery, or amicable land acquisition or compulsory land acquisition, they are potentially possible, but municipalities do not see the purpose of them. They don't see how they fit in the bigger picture of land management, and how the land management can serve, the higher aims of, sustainable land development or sustainable growth in the community, which points us back to the lack of general public discussion about how those territories should function in the broader term. And what Yegor also mentioned is that this utter focus of the government on showcasing progress via projects is detrimental to the need to take a step back and look at the territories with this comprehensive territorial reading approach.
Дякую, Олександр, за дуже детальну відповідь. У нас
Thank you very
наступне
much, Alexander, for your very detailed answer. We have a new question from Adrian Virus, and he is asking, how are the current communication channels in Ukraine operating between national actors and local municipalities? How do you think local comprehensive plans can be integrated into a national database, and what are the largest data gaps? This is the question.
Thank you, Adrian. I think this is again touches upon directly what Edwin started with, that there is a need for this meta-level institutions, or what is also called land administration system. I think Ukraine has already been discussing the data administration system, but not the land administration system, which is a bit different, because land administration system also requires land policies, not just information by itself. So I think I'm not an expert in the state cadastre discussions. I think they're happening somewhere else, not here. But people from the state geocadastre are working hard. However, they have little public outreach, in a sense that they're not public outreach in the sense of policy making for the local level. So they are aiding local communities to put comprehensive plans into the cadastre. I think it will happen. So there will be definitely, either it will be a separate public planning cadastre, or it will be integrated with a national database where several cadastres are present at once. I don't know that answer, but I think the question is not indeed with this digitalization component. It is more about the quality of what's in the quality and comprehensiveness of what's in these registers. And one of the pages in the report explains in detail that we are lacking hundreds or thousands of hectares of land underneath public buildings in the country. I mean, not the public buildings that are managed by municipalities, but owned by people who own apartments. So this land is in the air, and for us to approach reconstruction, we need to make that land part of the register. Unless it is there, there is no investment that can come in. So this is all very much connected. And unless there is a specific program, which is already been mentioned, not by me, I'm not the person who is the first one talking about it, but it is really the need that we kind of put our, stuff together, you know, put the things that we've been delaying and lacking and didn't have space to do, to put it together, and then to be sure that we have a solid base for the investment, especially public investment from European Investment Bank, from the World Bank, and from other institutions, that is going to cover you know, strategic investment directions to be related to the land plots, which are not yet in the cadastre in a lot of cases. So this is not an easy answer, or not an easy direction. So I'm a little bit exhortatory about other people to do stuff, but this is where we stand at the moment, I think.
Thank you.
Дякую вам, Олександр, за дуже
Thank you
детальну
very much, Mr. Anisimov, for your very detailed answer. And we still have one more question from Mr. Stefan Balici. He says, relating to the foreseen models for social and affordable housing development, which you have mentioned, where do you see the issue of architectural quality fitting in? So how do you see architecture and urban planning in Ukraine? Is it going to be a transition to the next level, or just more concrete?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert in architecture, and I think Rosquit is the kind of team to answer for the discussion about promoting new approaches to designing buildings, also public buildings. I think there are several projects coming up. Maybe it will grow up to some standards of public development of public projects in Ukraine. I think there have been a lot of connections with the municipalities and state administrations in regards to putting together requirements and putting together some kind of approaches that can deliver that architectural quality that is needed. IAM projects are not shining with architectural quality currently, and I think they will. One of the questions about that is one of the answers about that is quite simple, and I think I will limit myself to this, is that the system, which is now a public procurement system, Prozoro, disallows for architectural quality currently. And because unless you provide for a comprehensive competition, you are going to get what you get for the least amount of money. So the system is focused, and people try to redesign it. Nobody had any success in that currently, but all public procurement goes by the lowest price, meaning the lowest quality of design. I mean, that is how it works, unfortunately, and that has to be changed. I think this would be a first step to getting somewhere to maximum 50% of the price determining the winner.
Thanks. I would like
Дякуємо.
to ask Julie Lawson, who was also mentioned by you before and is part of this whole research already for quite a long time, and very knowledgeable about Ukrainian issues and land policies and housing policies mainly in general. So maybe Julie, you would like to join as a panelist and ask some questions real life. Thanks for joining us.
Okay. Sorry, if you can't see me, I'm not quite sure what's going on. Here we go.
You were there?
There we are.
Yeah,
Here I am. Hello, everybody. Hello, Oleksandr, and well done for presenting the report so broadly and with such detail. Yeah, I've been listening to discussions all day today about the problems of centralization and decentralization, and I wanted to hear your view on where does what would an emancipated, capable municipality look like? What would it have to be able to take on some of its decentralized roles, especially in planning for housing? So what would you imagine the kind of, if you like, partnership approach or multi-level governance or some kind of linkage that it can operate with assurance and clarity, but also be able to respond to local communities' needs on the ground. So have you thought about that?
Thank you for the question, Julie. I mean, looking back at the kind of quality of local land planning in Ukraine and in the Netherlands, for instance, there is a clear discrepancy, but we need to understand kind of what is behind this discrepancy, right? So there are some strategic and structural reasons that have led to the current conditions of the planning institutions and planning capacities, and also housing development capacities, I'd say. We just had the latest administrative reform, which finalized some kind of a basic ground for the future development. It's not like a lot of these places across Ukraine had a lot of ability or interest and the possibility actually to shape the future of space in the places they were governing, so to say. So it's only after 2020 that they are able to do it. And in those places, in those cities which were able to do it earlier, there is enough capacity. It is just, put to a wrong, or not put to it's not yet put to the right direction. I'm pretty sure there is enough local capacity in the bigger cities to set up a unit of 2 or 3 people to start thinking about how to deliver land policy and housing policy. And they actually have enough specialists. The question would be, how do we make it a national level issue if there is a housing or land housing needs and push for new land functions, or push for land use in the places where there isn't capacity yet? And that question I don't have an answer to, because we cannot push any more issues on the local budgets of those communities which are struggling with social infrastructure yet. So there is a need to understand of how the balance is going to happen. And I think the next week, ministry is going to present some vision for part of that strategic approach they are looking for in strategic development of different levels of communities. But I'm quite sure housing won't be a part of that discussion, or land policy won't be part of that discussion. So we're not yet at a position where these topics, especially in a combined way as land and housing, are going to be part of the municipal administration. And some things I imagine that need to be taken forward from where we stand now is that it is going to be, and it should be, a multi-level approach in all of its scale, because there is not enough capacity on the local level, and local level often doesn't know a lot. So it's hard to imagine of trying to train every 1,400, every one of those municipalities about housing and land use. There should be capacities on the regional level and ability on the regional level. Some regions are actually showing quite some positive progress on that, about land and guiding land and housing policy for the municipalities in regards to providing housing for IDPs. Is that they also don't have this kind of a longer term understanding about how does that become an institutionalized practice, or how does that becomes as part of the system of housing land provision, which I think is also a question. But that we need to push for multi-level governance. And I don't, as Edwin also kind of thought about, where is the link between the national guidance and the local level? It needs to be taken seriously that each of those levels have to find their role. And I think we should push for a regional level to be more interested and to be more active in this by guiding municipalities who are lacking resources towards this effective land policy, by recovering costs and also increasing their budgets and being able to provide housing. So I think this is very much connected and very much possible. And lastly, regarding kind of the financial instruments, is that also smaller municipalities will never be able to capture enough money or enough residents to cover for the money they want to capture. And they would need regional authorities to support them to implement these policies that cater for, a dozen municipalities or something. And they would need those regional authorities to put in the policies that would allow those smaller municipalities to participate in kind of a larger housing program or a larger land. For instance, just as a case, Vinnytsia region, as many regions, have their strategies so that they digitize with the help for the municipalities part of their land cadastres, to help those municipalities to be able to work on with the land they have at the moment. And this has to be expanded. There is nothing about kind of starting from scratch. There are things that are there, and they have to be put under some umbrella, so some logic of the public governance regarding land and housing policy.
Good. Can I ask another question?
Yeah, I want to say, do you have more on your liver? Oh,
Well, maybe just to bring in Edwin, because he's really he's a very humble expert, but he's really an expert and he's got experience. So, I mean, one of the things, let's hear also, how did they bring back in the Netherlands central guidance to enact local governments to play their role more actively? So we've seen a minister the last few years really actively trying with different instruments. What are there any lessons in that, in that kind of cooperation? And is there anything that perhaps the Netherlands, from its failures and from its success, has got something to add?
Wow, big question. I think it's all very early to say what the effect of the new policy discourse is. It's indeed, after 20 years of decentralization and liberalization, it's going into a different direction, that's for sure. But I don't see it materializing yet. And when I look at a very effective system, I usually go a little bit further back in time, when we used to have something in the Netherlands called the golden triangle of housing, whereby local authorities made sure that they had a good land use plan and that they provided land for housing. Not-for-profit organizations made sure they built affordable houses, and central government made sure that both of these actors, so both municipalities and not-for-profit actors, had sufficient resources to do so. So that's sort of, that sort of triangle is not there anymore, and that I think lots of people nowadays regret the destruction of that institutional arrangement, you could say. And so 2 lessons about that, I think, is that think about such multi-level, multi-actor arrangements that could deliver affordable housing and all sorts of other urban assets, to put it that way, and make sure you don't destroy things too early, because building them back, just like cities, but also like institutions, building back institutions is also not a straightforward activity.
Thank you.
thanks. I think when there are no super urgent questions anymore, then we should wrap up and have everybody back to their evening activities or dinners or starting of holidays, I understood, in a lot of countries. Anyone wants a last word? Then I would like to thank everybody very much for the presentation, but also for the work behind it, like everything done. Oleksandr and team, I know there's many more people than you behind it. Thank all of them a lot, and hope you find the stamina to continue this work, which is super relevant. Also would really like to thank Olena again. Now you have to translate yourself again, but for this beautiful translation, as ever you did. The Rosfit team, Edwin for your comments, and you for all your beautiful questions. And I give a last word to Yevgen. Thank you for being the new host of the Rosfit team.
Дякую вам.